I guess maybe 3 different things that we're going to pursue in the set of examples over the next class or 2. One of them relates to form processing. All right, so we're going to start using form controls to do some interactive stuff using JavaScript, which makes sense, right? You know, form is how the user interacts with the web page and supplies data. So it makes sense that forms would play a big role, you know, in any sort of interactivity. You know, sure, you could have the mouse over effect or do something when you click on something, but again, forms really is a big way that you can interact. So that's one thing. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on. We talked about changing CSS properties, right? We made things visible, we made things invisible. I think we changed colors of things. We played around with the CSS properties. We're going to focus now on changing HTML. And we're going to focus on changing it a couple different ways. All right? One way is we're going to focus on changing attributes of HTML tags that we have on a page already. Another thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at actually creating new HTML and putting it on the page. And we'll see some examples of that. So that's the second thing. First thing, integrate with forms. Second thing, update or make new HTML dynamically, interactively. And the third thing is we're just going to look at more and more JavaScript things in the JavaScript language. All right? So that's sort of going to be, over the next class or 2, that's sort of going to be our goals. And we're going to start out with just some very simple, straightforward examples that maybe aren't terribly meaningful, but we'll start to illustrate some of the points. And then we'll evolve to having you know, more extensive examples. Let's look at, let me grab some pictures here. And for the record, I know that the computer is not on, so this one does not count as one of my not having the right screen on. I think I made it through the whole class this morning without having the wrong screen on. I almost blew it, but I think I nabbed it at the last second for one of them. Let's see. Let's look at, I want to grab some images. When in doubt, right, we'll exploit really one of the main purposes that the internet was created, right? Sharing cat pictures. So we'll go and yeah, we will go and we will, you know, we'll look at some of my cat pictures. And I've used these as a basis for examples in other classes, but we're going to do something a little different with it today. Eventually. Okay, let's take a look at what we have here. I have a series of images of my cats, and I'm going to strip out the code that's already there, and we're going to build this code live and in color here today. Forgot the body tag, we'll add that in. I have a picture of 3 cats. All right. I actually have a big picture and a thumbnail picture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with the page having one of the cat's pictures on it. And I'm going to have a drop down where we will select what cat we want to see, and it'll change the image to be that. So in this case, we're not changing the style of anything. All right. I think most of the examples, we may have had 1 or 2 that dealt with changing the HTML, but most of our examples related to changing the style. In this case, we're actually going to change the HTML. So first thing we're going to do is a image tag here. And I'm going to give it a source of one of the cat images. We'll do this to start. And then we're going to put a drop down. And when we create the drop-down, notice that with the drop-down, there's 2 pieces of a drop-down. There is what the user sees, and then there is the value that the script is going to see, sort of behind the scenes. And I'm going to make the value that the user sees be the name of the cat. And I'm going to make the value the script sees the name of the image. All right. So there's no JavaScript, but we can at least see what this is going to look like, and then we can discuss the JavaScript. So I'll go and save this. And if I open this up, I get initially the picture of Cleo and the drop-down. And ideally, we're going to want to have it so that when we pick one, it displays that particular cat picture. All right. So let's think of ideally how we would want this to work. We could make it like this. We could make it where you click on the cat and then press a button, and it will show that image. All right? But that's a little clunky, right? It would seem to make sense that as soon as we change the drop-down, it can just go ahead and display the image just at that second, at that instant. All right? The question is what event is that? No, that's not an event. All right? We don't know. I heard on select, which again is not the correct name of the event. Selected index. I think you're having VB flashbacks. All right, that would have been pretty well on the mark for VB. But in JavaScript, what's the name of the event? Well, I don't expect you to know, right? If you knew, great, but I don't necessarily expect you to know because we haven't gone through this. So let's go and let's Google HTML events. Oh, I better not Google, right, or it would explode. Yeah. HTML select events. All right. We can look at, and again, if we look at this, our good friend W3 Schools, if we look at it and we scroll down, it supports these events. And rather than running through all of them, let's just jump to the one that we want. And the one that we want is onChange. When does the onChange event fire off? It fires off when you change the option in the drop-down. So if I go in the drop-down and I don't change it, if I just go in the drop-down and look at it and go back out, the onChange event doesn't fire, which is fine, right? We wouldn't want it to fire. There's nothing to do if you haven't changed the option. However, if the option changes, then we want to do it. Now the point is with this, all right, the point is with this is, again, try to think of how you want the interaction to work. You know, we've only talked about the onClick event before, I think. Maybe we've talked about onMouseOver, all right? But don't limit yourself to those events. If you can envision the way you want an interaction to happen, look to see if there's an event for that. All right? And in this case, what we want, there pretty much is an event for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to code something here. And onChange equals, it is onChange, right? Yeah. onChange equals, and I'm going to do something. Now, I could probably write this all in line, and I could put that there, but I might want to do a couple different things, right? And therefore, a lot of times you're better off just going directly and writing a function. So I'm going to write a function for this, and I'll call the function change picture. All right. That way, if I happen to have more than one line of code, all right, I don't have to mess around, you know, putting it next to each other and making it very hard to read. So I can put script tag here. And I'm going to put my function in. Oops. A function, again, starts with the word function. Then I have the name of the function, which we called change picture. Now, this particular function does not require any arguments. So we'll leave the list of arguments empty. And I will put in advance, and it's a good thing to do this in advance, I'll put the starting brace and the ending brace. Okay? Now, let's think through. If I change this from Clio to Simba, what do I want to have happen? I want that image to become not an image of Clio, but an image of Simba. In terms of tags and attributes, what is it that I want to change? Repeat that, please. Right, I want to change the JPEG. So what tag do I want to change? Well, I want to change that image tag. What attribute of that image tag do I want to change? I want to change the .src attribute. All right? So, what do I need to do? I need to, first of all, point to that element on the screen. How do you suppose I'm going to point to it? How have we pointed to things in previous classes? Pardon me?
By the value.
By the value?
Or whatever's in that text.
Okay, right. Right. Again, yeah, the way that we point to an element is we say get element by ID. Well, this guy doesn't have an ID, so we better add one, right? So let's go and add an ID of image cat. All right. Now we can point to it. All right. So, how do we point to it? Document and in parentheses I put whatever that image ID is, which was image cat. All this being case sensitive. Now, what attribute do I want to change on that image? What attribute do I want to change on that element? The SRC attribute. So, when we change the style, we typed in style dot and the name of the attribute. Here with the HTML, we simply type in .src. So we're going to point to this element that has an ID of image cat, and we're going to change the SRC attribute. And we're going to set it to something. All right? What do we want to set it to? We want to set it to the value of this dropdown. Right? The value that was selected. Notice for this dropdown there's a list of options. For each option there's two pieces. There's the text the user sees, and there is a value. What we're interested in is we're interested in the value of the item that was selected. So, you might not know how to do this, but we should have sort of an idea of how to do this based on what we've done before. All right? What do we want to do? We want to point to that element. So, we're going to do document get element by ID ddcats, and we have to grab the attribute of that control, of that object, that represents the value of the thing that we selected. Cleverly enough, it's simply .value. All right? So let's look at this statement, and I'm going to make the screen a little smaller so we can see the whole statement at one shot. Maybe a little smaller still. Maybe a little smaller still. All right, let's break down and let's analyze this statement. This is an assignment statement, right? How does an assignment statement work? Whatever is on the left side of the equal sign is going to get changed. All right? This side is going to be evaluated. Now, by evaluate, I mean if there's any math involved or any operations involved, those operations happen. Like I might be multiplying two numbers together, for example, or whatever. All right? So the right-hand side gets evaluated. In this case, the evaluation is easy, right? All we're doing is we're accessing the attributes of that drop-down. What attribute or what element are we addressing? Are we accessing the attributes of? The one that has an ID of ddcats, which is this drop-down. All right? What is the attribute of this drop-down that contains the value of the option that was selected? It's simply .value. So we can say document get element by ID ddcats value. That will evaluate to Clio if Clio.jpg if Clio was chosen, Simba.jpg if Simba was chosen, Jackson.jpg if Jackson was chosen. So we have that string that represents the name of the file that we want to use. What do we do to that string? Well, we point to this image object, this image control, and we say we want to change the .src property. Okay? The .src property. And what does the .src property control? It controls the actual image that appears. All right? You can almost think of an image tag as being like a picture frame. And the .src attribute is what actual picture is in that picture frame. So let's go and view this now and see if it works. And it does. All right. So, one way to change the HTML of a page is similar to the way that we change the style, right? We point at the element that we want to change, and then we use the name of the attribute that we want to change and change it to be that. Yes?
The last line there, could you review that again?
Which line?
Oh, I'm sorry, the IMGID equals image count. So why is there just the one as opposed to one for each of the three?
Because again, this image tag, think of that as a picture frame. What picture does that picture frame show? It shows whatever image is in that SRC attribute. As we click through this drop-down, we take whatever value was selected, that's what this represents, and we change that SRC attribute as though I just went in with an editor and changed it to simba.jpg or whatever. But I don't go and make that change manually. The code makes that change and substitutes in simba.jpg. So we've changed that tag not to use Clio.jpg as the image, but to use Simba.jpg as the image that appears within that picture frame.
And that's also setting the default to Clio as well.
Yeah, what this one is this matches up with the fact that Clio's the first one on the list, right? Because then when the page appears, Clio's in the drop-down, the image of Clio shows. So that was done deliberately to make sure that that matched up. Now, if I go in and click on the drop-down but don't change it, that event doesn't even fire. Okay? That event doesn't even fire. Questions? Let's talk about what if this didn't work. All right? We know it does work, but let's pretend it doesn't work. Let's throw a monkey wrench in this. And I'll show you the monkey wrench we're going to throw in. All right? Let's throw a couple monkey wrenches in. All right? And we'll know what's wrong, so it should be easy to fix it. But let's pretend that we didn't know what was wrong. And let's go through a systematic way of debugging it. All right? I'm big on having a systematic way of debugging. I think far too many developers, and even developers with some experience, just try stuff until they hit something that works. All right? And that's not the way to go. All right? You want to really have a systematic way of approaching and looking at it. The first monkey wrench I'm going to throw in is, what if I don't have the correct name for the function here? So the function's name is change picture, but let's say I make that change image instead. So now that's not the proper function name. Or even if I call it change picture, but I get the case wrong. That's also wrong. Let's take a look at what would happen. All right, refresh. I click Jackson, nothing happens. Simba, nothing happens. Clio, nothing happens. All right. I can go and look at my error console, and it actually gives me a little bit of a clue, and it says change picture is not defined. Now again, this is where, in my opinion, Firefox does a better, more precise job in reporting errors than Internet Explorer does. All right. In addition, there's a number of add-ons you can put onto Firefox to help you debug as well. But that's a pretty good clue, especially if you remember that it needs to be case sensitive. All right, so that's one thing that you can do. Look at the error council. All right, and remember it's case sensitive. Here's another trick that you do, and I've done this in every single programming language since the first program I wrote in Fortran, probably. All right, on punch cards, is you can put a display, an alert, depending on the language it does, it's debug code. All right, and what it will do is it will pop up a message giving you a bit of information. For example, in this case, it's not even making it to that function. All right, because I have the wrong name. So it's not doing anything in there. If I didn't realize that, I could spend hours looking at that code wondering what's wrong with the code. When actually, there's really nothing wrong with the code. It's just not getting to the code. So one thing I often do, and I suggest students do, is put an alert. Something simple like, I am in the function. And if you don't see it, that code isn't even being called. All right? So before you spend hours studying and trying to evaluate what's right or wrong with your code, make sure the code's getting called. Yep. And in this case, if we look, I make that check. All right? I'm not seeing my alert, so it's not being called. All right? Let's say that that isn't the problem. Let's say the problem is that I get the name of the drop-down wrong. All right? I call it ddcat instead of ddcat, so it's inconsistent. I'm going to comment out the alert for now. Still doesn't work. If I look at the error council, it tells me document get element by ID ddcats is null. How to put that in more layman-like terms is that there's nothing on the page that has an ID of ddcats. So that would be a tip-off that you got the ID wrong. Let's say you didn't get that right. All right? You could put the alert in, and now at least you're seeing that it's in the function. So the difference between this case and the other case is, in the first error, the first issue I was running into, it wasn't even making it to the function. In the second case, it's making it into the function, and the code in there is incorrect. All right? Let's throw another monkey wrench in here. Let's make this SCR, and let's fix this. Still not working. It's making it to the function now. What I could actually do is I could put an alert here to see, am I grabbing the value of the drop-down correctly? So I could put this in an alert. It's in the function, and the value of that drop-down is Clio JPEG. So that gives me some good information, right? I know it's making it to the function, and I know I'm correctly pulling the value from the drop-down. So therefore, what must be wrong is how I'm trying to set the SRC property. The point of all this is that really your two best friends in debugging the JavaScript code are, number one, the JavaScript error council that exists in Firefox. Number two, putting alerts in to show where your code is and to show values of certain properties and certain variables as you proceed through the script. Let's fix this. All right, and we should be back to normal with this working. What if we don't have an ending curly bracket? Doesn't work. If we look at the error console, you'll see two things, two errors. And again, one thing to remember is sometimes as you're debugging, it gets confusing because you might be seeing old errors in here, and it's hard to tell like what the new errors are, what the old errors are. So it's good sometimes to periodically clear that and then go and try it again. And now if we look at the error console, you'll see missing curly bracket after body and change picture not defined. Now if you look and say, well, wait a minute, change picture is defined. Well, not in the eyes of the browser, right? Because you never put in where that function ends. It tells us that there should be a bracket after the function body because it knows it made it through the whole function and it didn't run into the closing bracket that indicates the end of the function. So it knows that there's a problem there. And because of that, it's not able to load that function. And therefore, it acts as though it doesn't exist. So if you get an error saying that a function doesn't exist, when you know that it does exist, there's probably a big enough JavaScript syntax somewhere in that, syntax error somewhere in that function that's messing you up. All right. You have a couple of recourses. You could you could comment stuff out until you get it to work. A lot of different things. Look for the missing brackets and so on. Questions about this one? The idea, though, is to take an approach and consciously work to debug it as opposed to just like trying stuff. Oh, you know, look, it said it's missing a curly bracket. Let me just throw one in. Well, actually look to see what the implication of that is and go and know exactly where to add it instead of just adding in curly brackets anywhere. All right. I'm going to go and I'm going to add to this another goofy little piece of functionality that will illustrate a different way that we can access form elements and update the HTML of the page. Let's try this. Let's put an input. Type equals text. ID equals txt name. Now let's put a span here. ID equals results. What is a span tag? What's the purpose of a span tag? Yeah. A span tag is simply a container for stuff, but it's an inline as opposed to a block container. What tag is the cousin of the span tag? I know you don't know their family trees, but the div tag is, right? The div tag's related to the span tag because both of them are really just containers, right? There's no built-in defined functionality to either the span or the div. It doesn't really tell you anything about it. It just says, hey, this is a container. We're going to group some stuff here for whatever reason. It's not like an image tag where you're displaying an image. A span tag just says, okay, here's a chunk of code I want to treat as a unit. All right. What I want to do is I'll go in, first of all, and I'll add a button. And this is just going to be a plain old button. It's not going to be a submit button. We don't want to send this to a server. All right? And we'll make an on-click event that will say, on-click, greet user. And I'll declare my function up here. And what I want to do is, when I click the button, I want to take whatever value's in that name and just say, hello, person, whatever name I put in there. All right? So, to do that, in a nutshell, what we want to do is we want to shove some HTML code right here. Right? We want to put some HTML code right there. All right? There's a property for that. It sounds like the Apple commercials. There's an app for that. There's a property for that. There's a property for the code, the HTML code, between the start and end span tag, or any tag. Start and end of any tag, actually. Well, that's one way to do it. What we're going to do, though, is a more straightforward way is to use the inner HTML attribute. All right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say, I'm going to declare a variable. That's something I'm going to store in. I'm going to say document get element by ID. Again, a real workhorse in our DOM expressions because we use that all the time to point to that. TXT name. What property of the name do we want? We want the value of it. What's in the text of that text box. All right. I'm then going to say str name equals the word hello plus str name. So in the first line, I'm going to grab the value of the text box. So if the value of the text box is Mike, str name is going to have the value of Mike. In the second line, I'm going to add on to it, all right, I'm going to add on to it a string at the beginning that says hello. And then I'm going to go document dot get element by ID and what I call that results. Dot inner HTML equals str name. So let's watch what happens here. Let me give a value on the button. And I'll put a label before that. So I type in Mike, and I press greet, and absolutely nothing happens.
You get element by ID in there.
Document get element ID. Forgot the word by. See how clever of an instructor I am of accidentally making yeah.
Put it in the wrong spot. Yeah.
Get by element ID. See? I'm really making sure you're paying attention today. By ID. Thank you.
I was going to tell you, but I wanted you to figure it out by yourself.
Just remember that when you ask me for help on a problem. Quick greet, hello, Mike. All right. All right. Well and good. Could we make it greet as they were typing? All right. So let's get rid of that button. Actually, let's do this. Let's make a second version of this. And let's call it text name 2. And we can still call the same greet user. All right. And we can still set the same results. Actually, let's not have a... Yeah, let's do that. I don't want the button. Let's play around with some of these events. I can say on key up equals greet user 2. And I'll make a second greet user function just because I don't want to interfere with this one. This says greet user 2, text name 2. Okay, that should be right. All right, so it goes as I press the key up. Interesting thing is, again, it matters whether you're doing a key up or key down. Because watch. If I press the key, it's not until I release it. The implication is like this. If I say on key down, watch what happens. I hit M, and it says hello, but it doesn't show anything. I hit an I, it shows hello M. So when I do on key down, that data isn't in that text box yet. So therefore, it displays like what's there before that key's pressed. So therefore, if it matters if you want to do on key down or on key up. On key up is typically what you want to use. Pardon me?
Why does it do that?
Because the minute you press the key, it's not in that text box yet. It's not in the buffer, the order in which the events fire. So therefore, it's not in there, so it's not going to display it. Now, the next time I press the down key, the previous letter's in there. All right, but for this particular thing, what we really want is on key up. And then as we type it, it goes from there.
It keeps data in there correctly for on key up, but not on key down.
Right. Because the events fire in the order. The events fire, on key down event fires. The buffer, the key gets put in the text box. Then when you release the key, it fires. So when you press the key down, it's not in the text box yet. For, again, we're talking microseconds on the computer level, but it's not there yet. So it's not going to show you the value of the key until you hit the next key. Then it shows you the value of the previous one. All right. What else could we do? What other ones could we do? We could do on focus. All right. What's on focus do? That is, when we go into that field, it shows the value. So if we go in here, go in there and type Pete, doesn't show anything until we go into it. So when that text box gets focus, it goes and does it. Other options, we could do on blur, which is sort of the opposite of on focus. When you leave the field, so when I tab out of the field or leave the field, it does it. Another one that we could do is we could do an on change event, which is like an on blur, except it's an on blur and it only fires off if the value changes. So that second time, that function didn't execute. Can't really tell unless we put an alert in there, but trust me, it didn't execute.
But if you change it, then it should change.
But if you change it, then it will change. Right. So with an on change, it looks to see what the value was when you went in, what the value is coming out. If it's the same, doesn't do anything. If it's different, then it goes and fires off. All right. The key things for this, though, first of all, is how we're accessing the HTML elements. If you already have an HTML element, all right, you can reference the properties in a very similar way that we access the properties of the style sheet. We simply say document get element IID dot and then the name of the property. All right. If the other way to do it is we can actually go and we can put HTML code in between a span or a div or anything else by using, all right, by using a inner HTML. One more trick before we go. All right. Let's make a dynamic link generator. Again, this could be done several different ways. All right. We just have to write our generate link function. I'm going to grab strURL equals document get element by ID txt URL value. All right. I'm then going to use that to construct a link. All right. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Let me stare at this for a second. Actually, we'll do better than that. All right. Let's see if this works or not. Enter URL, www.google.com. All right, got an error. Let's see. Generate link is not defined. No. Generate link is not defined.
In that last line you typed, why is there a single quote in front of the HTTP there?
Because we want to generate our HTML tag to contain, to contain that function. Generate link. str. This should be link. Let's try this. I forgot a double quote. str name is not defined. Should be str URL. All right, almost there. Hey, href equals no. Okay. Yeah, this should be str URL as well. There we go. Fortunately, my crack editing team will edit this out of the video broadcast. No, I'm just kidding. And now we can link and we can go to Google. All right. Let's spend a minute looking at this. All right, what did I do? Well, first thing I did is I grabbed the name of the URL I wanted to make a link for from that text box. All right. If I were to do an alert here, it would show me www.google.com. I then create a string whose contents is the HTML tag that I want. All right. So, what does a link to Google look like? It would be, roughly speaking, href equals http www.google.com, close, starting bracket, then the text for the link, and then the close link. All right? So, everything that's between the double quotes is going to be put in the string verbatim. So in this case, href equals single quote, http:// is going to be put in that string verbatim. I'm then going to tack on the name of the URL to that string. So http:// www.google.com. I'm going to add on to it the closing single quote to close this quote around the HTTP, the end of the start tag, the link text, which is linked to the name of the URL, and then I have the ending A tag. We'll look at this in more detail, but here's sort of the lesson from this. And there's other ways to do this as well. This is one way to do that. The lesson to be learned from this is we can really do anything we please to this poor web page. All right? We can create HTML. We can change HTML attributes. We can change style attributes. We can change anything on the page that we want. It's all a matter of knowing the correct DOM to point to the thing that we want to change, and knowing the correct JavaScript syntax to make the correct statement to make it to work. All right? So this is an important lesson, and we'll explore this over and over again in the rest of the JavaScript examples. Is we can go and we can add HTML to the page. All right? And this is one way to do it. We can change existing HTML, like we did with the source attribute. And we can change the style like we've done in previous examples. So really, anything about the page we can change. All right? Simply by pointing to the thing that we want to change and having the proper JavaScript syntax to change it to what we want it to. All right. If the details of this are fuzzy for you, we'll come back and we'll look at that in more detail next time because, again, as always believing giving you more for your money, I've gone about 10 minutes over, so I'll cut myself off today. But if the details of that syntax is confusing, just be aware that what I'm doing is I'm creating a string that has an HTML tag on it, and then I'm plopping it on my web page through that inner HTML function. And I can make any HTML tag I want to and plop it wherever I want to. All right. We'll see you then over in lab.